aware of feeling tired all of the time? Not just physically, but emotionally tired as well. Maybe it's becoming harder to draw up that empathy, caring, and compassion for the kids or for your coworkers, and even for yourself. And finally, you might be aware of feeling like no matter what you do, it's just not enough. You just don't feel that sense of accomplishment that you once did. These are all symptoms of burnout, and if you're feeling any of this at home or at work, then you're not alone, because it's an increasingly common phenomenon, especially as we move through these unprecedented times. In today's video, I'm going to talk about burnout, and I'm going to talk about the pillars that I think are foundational in terms of your health to help you manage and prevent burnout. I'd like to share a little bit about me and why I became so interested in the mind-body connection and stress. I'm Dr. Ange Wellman, and I own the Wellman Clinic here in Peterborough, Ontario. And I'd like to tell you a story. So my interest in mind-body medicine likely began in childhood, but that's a story for another day. Today, the story I want to tell you began in 2004, 2005, when I graduated from chiropractic college. So the first job that I took was in Australia, and despite having lived in many places around the world, that was the furthest place that I had lived. And up until that point, the way that I managed my stress was either with a really good workout or a glass or two of wine. So in flying to Australia, at the time I was a nervous flyer. So I coped with that with a few in-flight drinks and inevitably broke out in a rash. So when I arrived in Australia, I visited a doctor to take a look at this rash on my leg. And he wasn't particularly concerned with the rash. He was more concerned with a very small mole on my leg that he noticed. So he told me to keep an eye on it, and I didn't really think much more out of it, to be honest, because that experience that I had in Australia working as a chiropractor was pretty intense and overwhelming. And so I spent 9 months in way over my head, but when I returned to Canada and got settled in another clinic in Vancouver, a couple of years later, I took a look at the mole, and I just had a feeling in my body that I better have it looked at. And so I went to a dermatologist, and he said, "Oh, I don't think it's anything to worry about, but we're gonna remove it." So a couple weeks later, I got a phone call, and I remember very clearly that I was at the office, and the doctor started using some pretty big words, and he was very calming and said, you know, it's nothing to worry about, but we do have to take very prompt action, and I've scheduled you an appointment with a surgeon, and blah, 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 blah. And so I showed up at this appointment, drove myself, thought that I would drive myself home, really not understanding quite the severity of what was going on. And basically, he had diagnosed me with invasive malignant melanoma. I certainly remember those words and the jolt that went through my body upon hearing them. But I also heard the words, "We caught it early." And so I thought, you know, this is going to just be a simple take the mole out and I'll be good. It was a little bit more involved than that. I did not drive myself home. I did end up with a very nice wound on my leg and 30 stitches. And so I spent the next 4 or 5 days lying on my couch alone in my apartment in Vancouver. At the time, I was just over 30 years old. And I will say that my life flashed before my eyes throughout all those days. And it was a wake-up call, and yeah, I was definitely scared. I was glad they caught it early, but scared. And so I definitely did some thinking about my life and how I got myself there, and certainly sun exposure is a big part of skin cancer, but there's more to it than that. And whenever I face a crisis, I make a trip to the bookstore. And so I pulled a book off the shelf by Dr. Gabor Mate, and the book was called When the Body Says No, The Hidden Cost of Stress. And I just happened to open it to a page that happened to have a story about skin cancer. And so I thought, oh my goodness, this is, if there could ever be a sign, this is it. And so I started to consider better ways to manage my stress than alcohol and over-exercising. And so I enrolled in a mind-body medicine program, an 8-week mindfulness program. And during that time, I actually started to notice some other symptoms in my body that became concerning rather quickly. And on exploring those, I ended up with a scan of my brain, and they found a lesion. And so, I thought that the skin cancer was scary, and 6 months later, we're talking about brain tumors. And so the good news is that everything ended up being okay. And certainly when you start looking, you will find things, and often you will find benign things. But it really started me on a journey, because for 2 years, I had MRI brain scans every 6 months to make sure that it wasn't growing. And I was also having very regular follow-ups with the BC Cancer Society. So it was an intense 2 years, while I was also trying to get a chiropractic practice off the ground and manage a six-figure student loan. And so the stress was huge, and it did lead me to take a year off chiropractic, and it led me to start exploring mind-body medicine. So this is a little bit of a long story, but what I wanted to tell you is that in having this health crisis, it really brought me to realize the role that stress was playing in my life and the need to do things a little bit differently. And it really opened me to exploring a different way of practicing chiropractic. And so to that point, I was very much a rehab, pain-oriented chiropractor. And then I started pursuing training with the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in the United States. And I really switched to a wellness model of chiropractic, where the focus is more about looking at ways to promote health and well-being in the body for lifelong vitality. And so that's a little bit about me and why I came to be so interested in and so passionate about the conversation around stress and the effect that it has on your health, and the role that chiropractic can play in helping the body to manage stress and obtain optimum well-being. When we talk about burnout, it's important to understand what is happening, or what has been happening in the body, to lead us to this place where we are feeling just so physically and mentally exhausted. So I want to talk about two different ideas. There's the idea of the stresses in our life, or how I refer to them in my practice is the stressors. And then there's the actual stress, which is what's happening in the body in response to those stressors. So we all have stressors in our life, and I like to put them into the categories of physical stress, chemical stress, and emotional stress. So just to give you an idea of what those might be, for somebody who runs a business, the physical stresses could be that you're spending long days sitting at a desk. You may not be exercising, or you might be exercising too much. Those are some examples of physical stresses. You might be doing a lot of lifting. The chemical stresses can be, the biggest one would be the way that we eat. It can be what we're drinking, the chemicals we're exposed to in our environment, and then obviously the emotional stresses. So at work, there's lots of emotional stresses, dealing with coworkers, dealing with the invariable ups and downs that come with running a business. At home, it's obviously with the relationship we have with our kids, the ongoing stress that's involved with parenting kids, and then the emotional stressors that we all have are the voices in our head and the stories that we're telling ourselves. So our stressors can be physical, chemical, or emotional, and they create a response in the body, which is called the stress response. And in the most simple of terms, what happens is that when we perceive a threat, and in our modern life, the threats are often more in our heads than actual lions running after us. But when we perceive a threat, our body is hardwired to go into the stress response. And our nervous system gets activated. Our nervous system mediates that response. And so we go into a fight-flight response that is meant to shut off when the threat is no longer there. And we are meant to actually recover. And what's happening is that we don't actually ever really recover. And that's because the chronic nature of the stresses in our life our body doesn't actually return to this feeling of safety. And so we get stuck and locked in the stress response. This is a very basic description of the stress response. For a more detailed look at what exactly is happening in the body, I will put a link below to a PDF that I created that just explains what's involved in the stress response if you want to go a little bit deeper. But the important thing to understand is that the stress response is getting activated, and often it's getting activated daily, but it's not getting shut off. And so this creates years and years of a body being in chronic overdrive. And so inevitably that's going to show up in our health, because our bodies were not designed to be constantly activated in a state of alarm. And so that's what leads to problems down the road. And what many people don't understand is that oftentimes the symptoms that have appeared, and they can be a real range. They can be mild symptoms of pain, headaches, stomach aches. But for some people, the symptoms can appear in more of a crisis situation, like a cancer diagnosis like I had, or a heart problem, or a diagnosis of diabetes or an autoimmune condition. And so these are not things that just happen overnight. These are things that have the process of these diseases has been building up for years and over time. And so it's important to realize that the things we're doing today are going to affect us tomorrow. And it may not be immediately tomorrow, it might be in the future down the road. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind. So a really important factor in understanding burnout is understanding what our stressors are, understanding how they may be affecting our body. Now, oftentimes in the practice, I will see people coming in who feel that they don't have any stress. And the truth is that the only people that don't have any stress are the people that are no longer with us, because stress is just a part of life. But it's not uncommon for people to be rather disconnected from what their stress is, and more commonly very disconnected from how their stress is affecting their bodies. So it's a great idea to spend some time thinking about what your stressors are, but also tuning into the body, if you can, to feel into how your body might be feeling, because most of us aren't taking that time to stop and really notice our bodies. And that's not actually always easy to do, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. And that's certainly something that in the practice we help people with, and we teach people how to become more aware of their bodies. But the other thing that we can do if we're having trouble identifying whether our body is in this chronic stress state is we can actually use technology to measure that. So in our practice, we use scanning technology called heart rate variability. And we also do two other scanning technologies, EMG and thermography, to help us identify where the stresses are in the spine, because as chiropractors, that's what we're interested in, and we're interested in the relationship the spine has to the nervous system. But a heart rate variability measurement is becoming something that more and more people are aware of as an indicator of overall health and well-being. And the reason for that is twofold. One is that there's some incredible research being done around how heart rate variability correlates with overall health status. But then also with technology, there's more wearable technology that's measuring heart rate variability. So in our practice, we measure it in the office. And then in my own personal life, I measure it using this ring that I have called the Oura Ring. And so heart rate variability gives us really great information about our health status, and specifically about how our autonomic nervous system's functioning and how well we are adapting to stress. So if you're unsure, or if you're curious and want to know more about where your body is at with respect to the stress response and how well you're adapting, then I invite you to come into the practice and we can measure it, or look into the wearable technology like the Oura Ring or the Whoop Band or the new Apple Watch that are starting to measure heart rate variability. So we've talked about the stressor and the effect that it has in the body, or the stress in the body. So what do we do about this? Well, we can look at the stressors and we can tackle those and manage those. And we can also try to complete the stress cycle in the body. And rather than keeping it in this vicious circle, we can try to bring the body out of the stress response. So it's really a two-pronged approach, in my opinion, because if we only focus on one, then we're going to still have 50% of the problem. So the things that I want to talk about today are what I consider the 4 pillars of health. And within these pillars, they are going to be either addressing the causes of the stress response, or they're going to be addressing the stress response. The first pillar I want to talk about is how we eat. So, this is obviously all of the pillars that I am going to talk about in this video series are pillars that would warrant many, many webinars, all of their own, many videos, all of their own. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into any of these. I want to just give you a quick reminder and some easy takeaway tips. So when I was in university, I used to love having quotes on my walls. And one of the favorite quotes I had was, "Your body is a temple, don't treat it like an outhouse." So food is one of the ways in which we can really treat our bodies like crap. So if we're striving for high performance, or we're desiring to be at our best as a parent, the food we put in our body is really the fuel for our bodies and for our brains. So if we want to be really creative, really productive, then it makes sense that we would want to be putting really high quality fuel into our bodies and into our minds. So, as we've all heard, it's really important to eat fruits and vegetables, to eat whole foods, to try to minimize the number of processed foods, and if possible, to try to not eat processed foods at all. Those are all really good things. As well, trying to limit alcohol intake. So I know as an entrepreneur and as a mother of 2 girls that nothing quite relaxes you like a nice glass of wine at the end of the day. And alcohol in moderation is not necessarily bad, although when you do start tracking your heart rate variability, you will notice the dive that it takes after a night of drinking alcohol. But, it's a fine line, and it's very easy when we're under a lot of stress to tip over that line and to get to a point where alcohol is actually no longer really serving us. And I have certainly dealt with that over the years. And so during this pandemic, in the beginning, I was certainly drinking more. And now I'm at a point where I don't drink during the week, and I try to just limit myself to 1 glass of wine on the weekends. And to be honest with you, I feel a lot better. I don't have the same level of fatigue in the morning that I used to have. So watching our alcohol consumption is important. Sugar consumption is important as well. Oftentimes we know what we should be doing with food, but knowing and doing can be 2 separate things. So what I find works really well for my family is, first of all, making sure the food that I don't want to eat doesn't even get into my house. I mean, the reality is if it's there, we're gonna eat it, right? But the other thing that really works well for me when we do it, and I'm human, so it doesn't mean that I've got this completely nailed, but when I've got it nailed, our life goes so much better, and that's a meal plan. So taking the time to plan out what you're gonna eat, and I really do think that it ends up saving a lot of time. So it makes the grocery store trip quicker because I have a list, and I write the plan on the wall so that everyone can see it and my husband can see it. So it's more efficient, and it ensures that we are eating better. So those are some things to think about with your diet. So remembering that what you eat is going to give you energy or it's going to take energy away, and asking yourself how you want to feel, because what you eat is really going to impact how your body feels. Movement is a huge foundation of health. I cannot overstate that. I feel that if you've been following me on social media, you may start to be feeling like I'm a broken record when it comes to movement. And that's because I actually know what it feels like to not move your body. So when I was growing up, I was a competitive athlete, I was a swimmer, And in my 20s, I was a runner and I did some adventure races. And then I got injured and I got into trying to pay back a 6-figure student loan and run a business. And I just let it all go. And I let it go for quite a long time, I'll be honest. And I really noticed the impact that it had on my body and my mind. And so in the last couple of years, and in the last year in particular, I've been really focused on trying to move my body again. And it's making a huge difference. It's making a big difference to my spine. It's making a big difference to how I feel mentally. And it is just the thing I know that's important for longevity and for aging well. So moving your body. And I like to talk about movement, the guidelines state 30 minutes a day at a minimum. And I understand that for the people that aren't exercising and who feel that they don't have enough time, that's going to feel like a lot. So I encourage people to really take it in chunks if that's what's more resonant, and break it down into 10-minute chunks. So the science shows that 10-minute bouts of exercise 3 times a day, so a total amount of 30 minutes, but done in chunks, actually has the health benefits that we are looking for with exercise. So if 10 minutes feels more manageable, and really, I think most of us could find 10 minutes to do something, then take it in those chunks. But the message that I want to deliver is that if you care about your health, and if you want to maintain and sustain a healthy business long-term, I do think that health is extremely important, because if you're not healthy, then your business isn't going to be able to thrive. Then movement is a very important piece of the puzzle. And this is applicable for parenting as well. When we move our bodies, we are helping our immune systems, our cardiovascular system, our respiratory system, really we're helping all the systems of our body, and it's really important for our mental health. So in Kelly McConaughey's book, The Joy of Movement, it talks about how a study was done that found that people who are getting less than 5,000 steps a day actually have an increased risk of anxiety and depression. And certainly mental health is on everyone's minds right now as we deal with unprecedented stress. And so moving your body is actually a way that you can help your mind and you can help your mental health. And so, short bouts, walking is a great way to move your body. It doesn't have to be intense. In fact, there is the law of diminishing returns. So at a certain point, the more intense we make it, actually the less good we're doing for our bodies. And so just trying to make it part of your daily life. A really important pillar that we need to take into consideration when we consider our overall health and well-being and managing and preventing burnout is our mind. I use the term in the practice, think well. In this pillar, it's really all about that connection between the mind and the body, and understanding that what's happening in the mind is not separate from the body. It is affecting the body, and it is either going to create stress in the body or help to ease stress in the body. So the mind can be a very powerful tool for healing the body and bringing the body out of the stress response. So when I talked earlier about completing the cycle, so we can use our minds to calm our bodies down. And specifically, we can do that in 2 ways. We can practice meditation and practice centering the mind and coming into the moment, mindfulness. And in so doing that, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms the body down. And then we can also do breath work, which I would put in this category as well. And the breath work is also a way, breathing is also a way for us to be able to calm the body as well. So understanding that how we think, our relationships, the boundaries that we have in our life, our ability to say no, these are all things that are either going to drive the stress response in the body, or by employing strategies to make sure that we are connecting the dots in terms of how those things are affecting the stress response. They can also be ways in which we can help our bodies to feel less stress. So a couple of simple tips in how we can manage our minds. Certainly meditation is one of my favorites. I like to use an app. It makes it easier. My favorite app is the Calm app, but there's a number of other really great apps on the market. Headspace is another one that I know is quite good. So doing meditation, and it does not have to be for a long time. It can be for 5 minutes. Short bouts are better than no bouts, I like to say. So meditation, a gratitude practice can also be really healthy for the mind and can help to shift perspective so that the body can feel better as well. And doing some breath work. So I want to share with you a technique that I have learned that has really beneficial for managing stress in the moment. So, you know, these pillars that I'm talking about are certainly things that require consistency over time. And, you know, with some of them you may feel benefits right away, but others, the benefit really comes in the practice of doing it over a lifetime. But it's important to be able to have tools to be able to manage stress in the moment when it's happening. So this is an exercise called the physiological sigh. And I got it from Ange Wellman, who is a neuroscientist out of Stanford that I have been following for a little while now. And he's brilliant. He has a podcast, so I recommend his podcast. It's called the Huberman Lab. And so this sigh is actually mimicking something that we do in deep sleep. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to do 2 inhales and then a long exhale. And the inhale is through the mouth, is through the nose, and the exhale is through the mouth. And so the first inhale should be slightly longer than the second, and then a long exhale. So I'm just going to show you how to do it. So here we go. So again, it's a longer inhale followed by a second inhale and then a long exhale. So I'm going to do it one more time. And to be honest with you, it's incredible how quickly it works. Like, it's an instant feeling of calm. And this is one of the best ways for you to complete that stress cycle that I mentioned earlier. So when you're aware that you're feeling very stressed, if you engage the breathing, what you're actually doing is activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the nervous system that's going to help you recover. So this is a really, you know, it's actually kind of an easy thing to do when other people are around. I will credit my husband as being the one who learned it first, and I started noticing him do it when the kids were maybe a little bit out of control, and I thought, what is he doing? But because you can hear the person doing it a little bit, but I mean, it is something that you could be doing at your desk at work when you're feeling stressed, or even in a meeting when you're feeling stressed. So it's a simple, easy technique for you to try. The final pillar that I want to talk about with respect to foundations for good health and well-being is recovery. And within recovery, there's 2 aspects of this. There's sleep and there's rest. So I'm going to explain how they're different. So sleep is incredibly important, and parents and entrepreneurs alike tend to let this one slide rather easily because there's just so many things to get done in the day that we stay up late or we wake up early to try to get them all done. And the truth is that we're really doing our health a disservice. And in Matthew Walker's great book, Why We Sleep, he actually takes it to the point of saying that the less you sleep, the less long you are going to live. And so sleep is really important for our brains to recover from the day. And it's during sleep that we consolidate our memories, and that we process our emotions, and that our brain actually detoxifies itself. So there's really important mechanisms that are happening in sleep for recovery. And so when it comes to sleep, it's important for us to be trying to get 7 to 9 hours sleep. It's very individual, but most humans need at least 7 hours of sleep. So I'm curious, how many hours are you getting? What I see in my practice is with people who are highly stressed, oftentimes they're not sleeping well. So they're having trouble falling asleep or they're having trouble staying asleep. And so in terms of some tips for sleep, it's really important to pay attention to light, actually. Light has a very strong correlation with sleep. So one way we can do that is by trying to get early morning light and light at dusk. So if you wake up early, trying to get out for a very short walk, it doesn't have to be more than 5 or 10 minutes, first thing in the morning, and exposing yourself to the morning light, and then following that up with an evening walk at around dusk. So light is what helps to set our circadian rhythms. And it's also why screens at nighttime are so bad for our sleep, because at night we are supposed to be exposed to much less light so that circadian rhythm is helping us to fall asleep. And when we are exposed to screens, it's going to alert our rhythms that it's actually not time to sleep, but it's time to be awake. So walking in the morning and at dusk, managing our screens at night, having a process of unwinding and starting that process before you want to actually fall asleep. So trying to do some calming things. It's a great time to meditate. It's a good time to read and maybe read for pleasure, to listen to music, anything that calms you down, to do some light stretching. Consistency is key with sleep, as is making sure that your sleep environment is cool and dark. So those are a couple of tips. I think the most important is just to understand how important sleep is and to prioritize it. And the other component of recovery is rest. So I did speak about this in another video around foundations to health, but rest is about taking time during the day to do nothing. And that is really counter to the culture, right? So we value overwork, and for many of the women that I work with, rest feels like a bit of like a hard no, because we feel lazy, we feel guilty. But the truth is that if we want to be really creative and productive, we actually need to rest our bodies. And so we can have periods of intense focus, and typically the brain can do that for up to 90 minutes. But then we also need periods of rest, and it's a rhythm. It's a kind of an up and down. So trying to build some rest into the day. It doesn't have to be for very long. And in that time, you can do nothing, which is probably pretty hard to do, but I recommend trying it. And often that's where inspiration will strike, is when we let our mind wander and see where it goes. If that feels uncomfortable, you could listen to music, you could do some breath work, you could do a meditation. So anything that just takes you out of the intensity for a couple of minutes and enables the body to recover. So recovery is just so important for completing the stress cycle. It's important for our overall health and well-being. And it's probably one of the things that most of us do not focus enough on. So I hope you found those tips helpful. It's a big topic. Burnout, how to manage your health and well-being. There's so much to say on the matter, and I've just scratched the surface in today's video, but I have lots of tips that I like to share on my social media. So if you're not following me on social media, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. It's the Wellman Clinic, and chiropractic is certainly a way to maximize your overall health and well-being by focusing on the spine and the nervous system and the role that plays in your health. So if you found that helpful, please feel free to comment or share, and better yet, do both. And until next time, live well for life.